The scratch of pen on paper was the only sound cutting through the rumble of jet engines outside Hangar 7. Marcus Hayes didn't look up from the divorce decree spread across the metal desk, its legal jargon blurring into white noise against the familiar scent of aircraft fuel and machine oil that had defined 30 years of his life. His hand, scarred from 1,000 burns, calloused from gripping wrenches in sub-zero maintenance bays, moved across the signature line without trembling. He'd cried himself dry 72 hours ago, the night he'd found Kate Miller kissing Gabriel Wolfe in the private office at 11 p.m. Her fingers tangled in the pilot's hair, like she'd never worn Marcus's grandmother's wedding band. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, casting harsh shadows across the conference room, tucked into the corner of Montgomery Aviation's largest hangar. Through the industrial windows, a Bombardier CRJ 900 sat on jacks, its Pratt & Whitney engines exposed for the turbine blade inspection Marcus had been supervising before the lawyer called. His navy blue coveralls bore his name in white stitching above the left pocket. M. Hayes, lead engineer. The fabric smelled like JP8 fuel and the particular metallic tang that came from grinding titanium components. On the desk beside the divorce papers lay a set of blueprints he'd been reviewing that morning. Technical drawings for the variable geometry bypass duct he'd spent 2 years developing. The project that might revolutionize fuel efficiency in regional jets if Montgomery's R&D budget ever materialized. Kate sat across from him in a black suit that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. Though he'd never questioned it during their 5 years of marriage, she'd always explained away the designer pieces as thrift store finds, estate sale treasures, gifts from a wealthy aunt in Boston who didn't exist. Her Coach bag, the vintage kind that ran $400 new, rested against the chair leg. The scent of her perfume, Estee Lauder's Beautiful, the expensive kind that came in the heavy glass bottle, drifted across the table. He'd bought her drugstore fragrance their first Christmas together. She'd smiled, worn it once, then this richer scent had appeared on her dresser with some story about a Black Friday sale. Her voice cut through his thoughts, cold and efficient as a pre-flight checklist. You just need to sign, Marcus. The lawyers drafted the prenuptial agreement carefully. You keep the house. I'm not asking for alimony. It's simple. Marcus's head came up slowly. His blue eyes, the same shade as the October sky visible through the hangar's open bay doors, meeting hers for the first time since she'd sat down. The fluorescent light caught the gray threading through his dark hair, more salt than pepper now at 52. Lines creased the corners of his eyes from 2 decades of squinting at maintenance manuals and aircraft schematics in inadequate lighting. The question came out rougher than he'd intended. Prenuptial agreement? 5 years ago you told me you were just an accountant at a mid-level firm. Why would an accountant making $60,000 a year need a prenup? Something flickered behind Kate's brown eyes. Not quite guilt, more like the look of a pilot who just noticed a warning light on the instrument panel, but hadn't decided whether to declare an emergency. She broke eye contact, her gaze sliding to the window where 2 mechanics in coveralls were towing a fuel truck past the Bombardier. The words came out too practiced, too smooth. I'm cautious. My parents taught me to protect myself financially. The laugh that escaped Marcus's throat held no humor, just the hollow sound of understanding arriving 3 years too late. Or maybe you planned to leave from the beginning. The blueprints on the desk caught his peripheral vision, the detailed cross-sections of combustion chamber designs and airflow calculations representing 14-hour days in the engineering bay, weekends spent running computational fluid dynamics models on his aging home computer, while Kate claimed to be at yoga classes that apparently didn't exist. The bypass duct design could reduce fuel consumption by 18% in cruise flight. He'd verified the numbers 3 times, checked them against wind tunnel data Montgomery's chief aerodynamicist had helped him gather during off hours. Worth millions in licensing fees if a major manufacturer picked it up. worth even more in the long-term efficiency gains for airlines operating on razor-thin profit margins. His mind dragged him backward 5 years against his will, to the September afternoon on I-95 when he'd spotted a silver Lexus pulled onto the shoulder, hood up, hazard lights flashing. He'd been driving home from a union meeting, his F-150 loaded with tools from a side job replacing brake assemblies for a neighbor. The woman standing beside the Lexus had worn a simple white blouse and black slacks. No jewelry except a watch that looked like a department store Timex. Dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She'd been staring at the engine bay with the particular expression of someone who knew they were looking at a problem but had no idea what they were seeing. Marcus had pulled over because that's what you did when someone needed help, the same way his father had stopped for stranded motorists on rural Oregon highways during Marcus's childhood. The alternator belt had snapped. A $15 part, 30 minutes to replace if you had the tools and knowledge. She'd offered to pay him. He'd waved it off, asked if she wanted coffee while the engine cooled enough to work on safely. They'd sat in a diner 2 exits down Route 1, talking about nothing important, her supposed job as an accountant at a firm she'd named generically enough that he'd never thought to verify, his work at Montgomery Aviation, his daughter Lily, who was 11 at the time and already taking apart kitchen appliances to understand how they worked. Kate had laughed at his stories about Lily, her whole face transforming from the stressed motorist into something warm and genuine, or he'd thought it was genuine. Turned out, he was as good at reading people as he was at rebuilding turbofan engines, which was to say, completely incompetent when it came to anything outside his technical expertise. They dated for 8 months before he'd proposed in the same diner, sitting in the same booth, with his grandmother's modest diamond ring that had survived 2 world wars and his own first marriage to Sarah. Kate had cried when she'd said yes, real tears that had seemed to come from somewhere deeper than performance. Or maybe everything had been performance from the moment she'd staged the breakdown on I-95, calculating that a widow with a preteen daughter would be vulnerable, that a blue-collar engineer would never question a woman who seemed content with a simple life in a 3-bedroom house in suburban Connecticut. The pen finished its path across the signature line. Marcus Hayes, written in the blocky capitals he'd learned drafting mechanical drawings by hand before CAD software had taken over the industry. He pushed the folder across the desk, the metal surface still bearing coffee rings from the morning production meeting where Montgomery's operations director had announced another round of budget cuts that would delay Marcus's engine project indefinitely. The word came out flat, drained of the emotion he'd spent 3 days processing. Done. Kate's hand moved fast, snatching the folder before he could change his mind. Her fingers, manicured in a way that should have been a red flag for someone claiming to be a mid-level accountant, flipped through the pages, checking each signature placement like she was reviewing a critical contract. When she found everything in order, something in her posture relaxed, a tension releasing that Marcus only now recognized as fear. She'd been afraid he'd fight her, demand explanations, make her justify the betrayal. She stood, the chair scraping against the concrete floor loud enough to make one of the mechanics outside glance toward the conference room window. Her bag came up over her shoulder, the leather supple in a way that only came from the kind of craftsmanship that charged premium prices. Marcus tracked the movement with the detached observation of an engineer noting a mechanical process. She moved with the unconscious grace of someone used to expensive things, someone who'd grown up in country clubs and private schools, not the working-class background she'd invented for their relationship. The pause stretched long enough that Marcus wondered if she'd leave without speaking. Then she stopped halfway to the door, her back to him, shoulders rigid beneath a tailored suit jacket. The words came out quieter than anything she'd said since sitting down, carrying something that might have been actual regret. Marcus, you're the best man I've ever known. I'm sorry you didn't deserve any of this. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slamming exit would have been. Marcus sat motionless, staring at the empty chair across from him, while the sounds of the hangar filtered through the walls. Pneumatic tools, rolling equipment, the steady background hum of compressors and generators that was the soundtrack of his working life. His eyes dropped to the blueprints, to the precision lines and calculated angles that made sense in ways human behavior never would. His phone vibrated against his hip, the ringtone cutting through the white noise. Lily's name lit up the screen, her contact photo showing her at 15 wearing safety goggles in the school's engineering lab, grinning at the camera while holding a circuit board she'd just finished soldering. He answered on the third ring, keeping his voice steady through long practice at hiding emotion from his daughter. "Hey, sweetheart." The teenage voice on the other end carried an edge of worry that 16-year-old Lily had developed in the 3 days since Kate had moved out. "Dad, where are you? You were supposed to pick me up 20 minutes ago." Marcus checked his watch, a stainless steel Citizen his squadron had given him when he'd separated from the Air Force after 20 years of service. Its face scratched from 2 decades of catching on engine cowlings and airframe panels. 3:45. School let out at 3:15. He pushed to his feet, his knees protesting the sudden movement after sitting motionless for 40 minutes. "I'm sorry, kid. Got held up at work. I'm heading to the truck now." The drive to Aviation Technical High School took 18 minutes in light traffic, the route carrying him past a suburban sprawl that had consumed Connecticut's farmland over the past 30 years. The F-150's radio stayed off, leaving Marcus alone with thoughts that churned uselessly like a turbine engine running without load. The October afternoon sun slanted through the windshield, warm enough to need the air conditioning despite the fall season, another symptom of the climate shifts that were making his fuel efficiency research increasingly critical to an industry that burned fossil fuels by the millions of gallons. Lily waited on the front steps of the school's main building, her backpack covered in patches from engineering competitions and robotics clubs. She'd inherited Sarah's dark hair and her mother's quick mind, combined with Marcus's stubborn refusal to accept that something couldn't be understood if you studied it long enough. At 16, she was already taking college-level physics, had been accepted into an early admission engineering program at the University of Connecticut that let high school juniors audit undergraduate courses. She climbed into the truck without speaking, her eyes going straight to her father's face with a particular intensity she'd developed after Sarah's death 10 years ago, when 11-year-old Lily had appointed herself guardian of her father's emotional state. Marcus had tried to shield her from the worst of the grief, the same way he was trying now to hide the particular emptiness that came from having your trust shattered by someone you'd let past every defense. The silence lasted until they were 3 blocks from the school. Then Lily's voice cut through, flat and knowing. "You signed them, didn't you?" Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel, the worn leather familiar under his palms from 17 years of driving this truck through Connecticut winters and summer heat. "Yeah." The sound that came from the passenger seat might have been a suppressed sob or just a sharp exhale. When Marcus glanced over, Lily was staring out the window, her jaw set in the stubborn line she'd inherited from him, the one that appeared when she was fighting tears and refusing to let them fall. Her voice came out smaller than he'd heard it in years, younger. Did she say why she was leaving?" The truth stuck in Marcus's throat, that he'd caught Kate with another man, that the explanation had been humiliatingly simple and completely devastating, that his wife of 5 years had been cheating with Gabriel Wolfe, the test pilot who joined Montgomery Aviation 6 months ago, the former military officer with movie star looks and the kind of confidence that came from flying experimental aircraft at the edge of their performance envelopes. But Lily didn't need that particular wound added to the collection of losses she'd already suffered in her short life. Sarah's death from ovarian cancer when Lily was 6 had been traumatic enough. 3 years of hospitals and failed treatments that had drained their savings and left Marcus, a single father, learning to braid hair and navigate the social complexities of elementary school girls while working full-time and carrying Sarah's medical debt. He settled for a version of truth that wouldn't add unnecessary damage. People fall out of love sometimes, sweetheart. It doesn't mean anything was wrong with us. It just means she wasn't the right fit for our family. The words tasted like the careful lies he'd told Lily when Sarah was dying. The reassurances that Mommy would get better, even as the oncologist's expression made it clear they were measuring time in weeks. He'd gotten good at protective dishonesty, at shielding his daughter from adult pain that would land on her shoulders soon enough without him accelerating the timeline. The house appeared at the end of Oak Street, a modest 3-bedroom ranch that Marcus had bought 12 years ago when the Air Force retirement pay and his Montgomery aviation salary had finally put home ownership within reach. The mortgage was manageable, the neighborhood safe, the commute reasonable. Sarah had lived here for 2 years before the cancer had taken her. Lily had grown up in the second bedroom, its walls covered in engineering posters and mathematics competition ribbons. Kate had moved in 5 years ago after a wedding ceremony at City Hall, with Lily as the only witness. A simple affair that Kate had claimed to prefer over the traditional church ceremony Marcus had half expected her to want. Inside, the house felt larger than it had 3 days ago, emptier in ways that had nothing to do with the physical space. Kate had taken her clothes, her books, the kitchen gadgets she'd insisted on buying despite Marcus's objections that their existing equipment worked fine. She'd left the furniture they'd purchased together, the wedding photos from the hallway, small mercies that felt more like she couldn't be bothered to pack them than actual consideration for Marcus's feelings. Marcus moved through the familiar routine of home arrival, keys in the bowl by the door, work boots swapped for house slippers, coveralls stripped off and tossed in the utility room hamper. Beneath them, he wore jeans and a faded University of Connecticut t-shirt from a campus visit with Lily last year. The normality of the routine felt like mockery, his body going through motions while his brain processed the reality that his second marriage had just ended in the same hangar where he'd worked for the past 15 years. In the kitchen, he pulled ingredients from the refrigerator by muscle memory, beef stew components that could simmer for hours and taste better for the wait. Sarah had taught him to cook during her first remission, insisting he needed to know how to feed Lily proper meals instead of relying on frozen dinners and takeout. The lessons had stuck, became part of his identity as a father who could handle domestic responsibilities alongside the technical demands of keeping aircraft airworthy. The rhythmic sound of chopping vegetables created a meditation, the knife work requiring just enough attention to quiet the louder thoughts. Brown the meat, deglaze the pan, add stock and aromatics. The familiar chemical reactions of cooking, Maillard browning, collagen breakdown, flavor compound extraction, followed rules as reliable as thermodynamics. Heat plus time plus proper ingredients yielded predictable results, unlike human relationships that seemed to operate on principles Marcus had never successfully decoded. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, her backpack dropped in the hall, still wearing the aviation technical high school hoodie that marked her as part of the engineering track. She'd changed from her school shoes to the fuzzy socks with cartoon airplanes that Marcus had bought her for Christmas. At 16, she existed in the strange space between childhood and adulthood, fierce and fragile in turns that gave Marcus whiplash trying to navigate. She pulled out a chair at the kitchen table, the same table where they'd eaten thousands of meals, where Marcus had helped her with homework and college applications, where Kate had sat across from them, pretending to be part of their family. Her iPad emerged from somewhere, the tablet they'd bought her for school that she used for everything from engineering simulations to social media stalking. The silence stretched while Marcus added potatoes to the pot, adjusted the heat, set the timer for the long simmer that would break down the tougher cuts of beef into tenderness. He was reaching for plates when Lily's voice stopped him, carrying a tension that made his parental alarm systems activate. The question came out carefully, like she'd been rehearsing it. "Dad, do you know who Kate really is?" Marcus turned from the stove, wooden spoon still in hand, confusion overriding his grief for a moment. "What kind of question is that?" Lily's fingers were moving across the iPad screen, her face lit by the glow, her expression serious in a way that made her look older than 16. "I've been researching. Kate Miller doesn't have any records before 2019. No college transcripts, no employment history, no social media presence. It's like she appeared out of nowhere the year before she met you." The spoon clattered against the pot as Marcus set it down too hard, his engineer's mind already running through the implications while his emotional core rejected them. "You investigated Kate?" The words came out sharper than he'd intended, defensive in a way that embarrassed him immediately. Lily's head came up, her eyes meeting his with the particular stubborn expression that appeared when she knew she was right about something and refused to back down despite social pressure. She didn't flinch from his tone. "I didn't trust her from the beginning, Dad. Women who carry Coach vintage bags don't work as accountants making $60,000 a year. That perfume she wore, Estee Lauder Beautiful, runs $150 for the small bottle. And the way she handled silverware at dinner, the casual familiarity with wine she claimed to know nothing about, how she never made mistakes with formal place settings even though she said she grew up working class." The observations hit Marcus like foreign object damage to a turbine blade. Each one small, but cumulatively devastating. He'd missed every single red flag. Too grateful for a second chance at partnership after Sarah's death to question whether Kate's story held together under scrutiny. A 16-year-old had seen through the performance his 52-year-old grief and loneliness had rendered invisible. He moved to the table, pulling out the chair across from Lily with suddenly unsteady hands. "Show me what you found." Lily's fingers worked across the screen, pulling up a website that loaded in the clean corporate style of a major aerospace company. Sterling Aerospace Corporation dominated the header, the logo a stylized wing that Marcus recognized from industry publications. The company competed directly with Montgomery Aviation in the regional jet market, undercutting their bids and poaching their talent with higher salaries that a smaller operation couldn't match. She navigated to the leadership team page, scrolling past headshots of executives Marcus vaguely recognized from conference appearances and trade show presentations. Then she stopped on a photo that made Marcus's lungs forget how to process oxygen. Kate Miller stared out from the screen, except her hair was styled differently, swept to the side in a professional cut that probably cost more than Marcus spent on haircuts in a year. She wore a charcoal suit that screamed executive, not the business casual pieces she'd worn to her fictional accounting job. Below the photo, text identified her as Catherine Elizabeth Sterling, Chief Operating Officer. Lily's voice seemed to come from underwater, muffled by the roaring in Marcus's ears. "I'll read the bio. Catherine Elizabeth Sterling, Chief Operating Officer, Sterling Aerospace Corporation. B.S. Aerospace Engineering, University of Michigan, Executive Leadership Program, Wharton School of Business. 25 years of experience in aerospace engineering and corporate operations. Daughter of late CEO Howard Sterling, sister to current CEO Evan Sterling. Previously served as VP of Operations before assuming COO role in 2020. The kitchen tilted, or maybe Marcus's sense of balance had stopped functioning. His hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, while his brain tried to reconcile 5 years of marriage with this new data. Kate Miller didn't exist. She'd never existed. He'd been married to Catherine Sterling, Chief Operating Officer of his company's primary competitor, daughter of aerospace royalty, a woman who probably made 10 times his salary and had access to resources Marcus could only imagine. the blueprints, the engine design. The technical conversations where he'd explained his bypass duct concepts in detail, because Catherine, had asked interested questions about his work, seemed genuinely curious about the engineering challenges he faced. 3 months ago, he'd walked her through the entire combustion chamber redesign, shown her the CAD models, explained the variable geometry mechanism that allowed efficiency optimization across different flight regimes. 2 weeks ago, Sterling Aerospace had announced their new engine program, the Sterling EcoJet, marketed as a revolutionary approach to fuel efficiency in regional aircraft. Marcus hadn't paid much attention beyond noting that a competitor had beaten Montgomery to market with a similar concept. He'd been too busy dealing with budget cuts and Kate's increasingly distant behavior to read the technical specifications in detail. His voice came out hoarse, damaged. Pull up the Sterling EcoJet announcement. Lily's fingers moved quickly, navigating to Sterling's press release page. The announcement loaded with promotional images of a turbofan engine that made Marcus's heart stop. The external cowling design was identical to his blueprints. The bypass duct geometry matched his CAD models. Even the composite material callouts in the technical specifications reflected his research into thermal-resistant polymers for high-temperature applications. They'd stolen his work. Catherine Sterling had married him, lived in his house, slept in his bed, and systematically extracted 2 years of research and development that Marcus had poured his savings and free time into developing. The bypass duct design represented 14-hour days, weekends spent in the engineering lab running simulations, early mornings before work reviewing fluid dynamics calculations, worth millions in licensing fees, worth even more in the competitive advantage it would give any manufacturer that brought it to market first. The laugh that escaped his throat sounded unhinged even to his own ears, bitter and sharp. She stole my engine design. Lily's hand reached across the table, covering his, her 16-year-old fingers surprisingly strong. Dad, do you have proof? Original files, timestamps, anything that shows you developed it first? The question snapped Marcus's brain back into analytical mode, the engineer's training overriding the emotional breakdown threatening to swamp him. He pushed away from the table, moving to the small home office off the kitchen, where his desktop computer sat surrounded by stacks of technical journals and aerospace engineering textbooks. Lily followed, her iPad still glowing with Catherine Sterling's corporate headshot. His computer booted slowly, the aging hardware a reminder that Marcus put his money into Lily's education and house maintenance, not personal technology upgrades. The file directory loaded, showing folders organized by project and date. He navigated to the bypass duct research, opening the earliest CAD files. The timestamps told the story clearly. Initial concept sketches dated back 26 months. Detailed design work had consumed the following year. CFD simulations, structural analysis, thermal modeling, all time-stamped and saved in formats that included metadata proving when they'd been created and by whom. Marcus had been meticulous about documentation, the military training and engineering discipline combining to create records that would stand up to any patent dispute. He filed a provisional patent application 18 months ago, paying the fees out of pocket because Montgomery's legal department had been too busy with other priorities to handle it. The application was still pending in the patent office bureaucracy, waiting for an examiner to review the claims and issue a non-provisional patent. But the filing date established his priority, proved he'd invented the technology before Sterling had announced their version. Lily was reading over his shoulder, her quick mind processing the implications. You have everything you need for a lawsuit. Original designs, timestamps going back 2 years, patent filing that predates their announcement. Dad, you could take them down for intellectual property theft. The words hung in the air while Marcus stared at 26 months of work condensed into gigabytes of technical data. His life's best engineering, the innovation that was supposed to secure Lily's college fund and maybe fund his retirement, stolen by a woman he'd trusted completely, a woman who'd systematically positioned herself to exploit his loneliness and his eagerness to believe that someone could love him after Sarah's death. He reached for his phone, the contact for Albert Miller stored in favorites. Miller had been the squadron's JAG officer during Marcus's Air Force years, had transitioned to civilian patent law after retirement. They'd stayed in touch through Christmas cards and occasional phone calls, the kind of military friendship that survived separation and time zones. Miller answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the gravel of a 30-year smoking habit he'd finally kicked. "Marcus Hayes. Been a while since I heard from you. What's going on?" The explanation took 15 minutes, Marcus laying out the timeline while Lily pulled up supporting documents on her iPad. Miller listened without interrupting, the occasional grunt indicating he was taking notes. When Marcus finished, silence stretched long enough that he wondered if the call had dropped. Then Miller's voice came back, grim. "Marcus, this is a David and Goliath situation. Sterling Aerospace has legal teams that number in the hundreds, deep pockets, connections in the federal judiciary, resources to drag out litigation for years until you're bankrupt from legal fees. You're going to need ironclad evidence and a willingness to spend everything you have fighting them." Marcus looked at Lily, at his daughter who'd just exposed the truth his grief had blinded him to, at the girl who deserved college without crushing debt and a future not limited by her father's bad judgment. "I have the evidence. File timestamps, CAD models, patent application with clear priority date, email records discussing the project with Montgomery's R&D team. What else do I need?" Miller's exhale carried static over the connection. "A miracle, or leverage. Something that makes Sterling more afraid of the lawsuit than they are confident in their ability to crush you. Without that, you're looking at years in court and probable bankruptcy, even if you eventually win." The call ended with Miller promising to review the documents Lily would scan and email, with warnings about preliminary injunctions and discovery processes that could expose Montgomery Aviation's own intellectual property in ways management wouldn't appreciate. Marcus set the phone down, staring at the computer screen where his best engineering work stared back in wireframe CAD models and mathematical proofs. Lily's voice cut through his thoughts, quiet but firm. "We're going to fight them, right? We can't let her just steal your work." The question deserved a better answer than Marcus had. He'd spent 20 years in the Air Force following orders, trusting the chain of command, believing that institutional processes would deliver justice if you did your job correctly and reported problems through proper channels. Then he'd spent 15 years at Montgomery Aviation, learning that corporations protected themselves first and employees a distant second, that innovation got credited to companies rather than individuals, that loyalty flowed upward but rarely returned in kind. But this wasn't about military justice or corporate politics. This was personal theft by someone he'd invited into his home, his family, his bed. Someone who'd calculated his vulnerability with the precision of an engineer optimizing a design parameter, who'd extracted what she needed and discarded him when the value proposition changed. He turned to face Lily, seeing Sarah's determination in their daughter's expression, feeling the particular weight of fatherhood that came from knowing your decisions would shape the life of someone who depended on you completely. "Yeah, kid. We're going to fight, even if it costs everything. We're going to make sure people know I developed that engine design, that Sterling stole it, that you can't just take someone's work and claim it as your own." The stew had started to bubble, the rich smell of browning meat and vegetables filling the kitchen. Marcus moved back to tend it, adjusting heat and seasoning through muscle memory, while his mind churned through legal strategies and evidence compilation. Lily settled at the table with her iPad, already drafting the email to Miller with scanned documents and technical specifications. They ate dinner in relative quiet, The meal Marcus had prepared tasting like cardboard despite the proper cooking technique. Lily pushed food around her plate, her usual teenage appetite missing. The empty chair where Catherine, had sat for 5 years, dominated the space like a ghost at the table. After dinner, Marcus retreated to his office while Lily tackled homework. He spent 3 hours compiling documentation, building a chronological timeline of his engine development work, cross-referencing his files with email records and project notes. The evidence was overwhelming. He'd developed every aspect of the bypass duct design, documented each iteration, kept meticulous records that proved independent invention. Sterling's announcement had been 2 weeks ago. They'd claimed the EcoJet represented 3 years of internal R&D, a timeline that would put their development starting a year before Marcus's initial concept, if their story held up. But Marcus had his timestamps, his patent filing, his witness testimony from Montgomery colleagues who'd discussed the project with him. Any competent engineer reviewing both designs would see they were identical beyond the threshold of independent invention. His phone buzzed against the desk, an unknown number lighting the screen. Marcus almost declined the call, finger hovering over the red reject button. Then curiosity overrode caution. He answered without speaking, waiting. Catherine's voice came through, familiar in ways that made his chest ache despite everything. "Marcus, it's Catherine. Please don't hang up. I know you've discovered who I really am. We need to talk. Not for my sake. For yours. There are things about this situation you don't understand. Things that will make sense if you'll give me a chance to explain." The audacity of the request made anger flare hot and sudden, replacing the grief that had dominated his emotional landscape for 3 days. Explain? You want to explain how you lied about your entire identity for 5 years? How you stole my engineering work? How you married me under false pretenses and destroyed my ability to trust anyone ever again? A pause, then her voice came back steadier, carrying something that might have been actual emotion instead of the calculated performance that had defined their marriage. "I deserve your anger. I deserve worse than your anger. But if you file a lawsuit against Sterling, Evan will destroy you. He's already prepared countermeasures, fabricated consulting contracts that make it look like you stole from us, forged signatures that are good enough to pass initial scrutiny, witness testimony from people he's paying to lie. You'll be bankrupt and potentially facing criminal charges before you get past the first hearing." The words landed like foreign object damage, unexpected and devastating. Marcus's free hand gripped the desk edge, his engineer's mind already running through the implications. "You're threatening me?" Catherine's exhale carried through the phone connection, exhaustion, and something else. "I'm warning you. Evan found out about us 6 months ago. He's been planning this since then. How to extract your research, how to neutralize you as a threat, how to use your relationship with me to discredit anything you might claim. The consulting contracts are dated 3 years back. He has your signature samples from restaurant receipts, bank checks, documents you signed at our house when I asked you to witness forms. The forgeries are good enough that you'll need handwriting experts and document examiners to prove they're fake. And that takes time and money you don't have." Marcus's stomach dropped, the implications cascading like a compressor stall propagating through turbine stages. He'd signed hundreds of documents over 5 years of marriage, lease agreements, mortgage refinancing, tax returns, insurance policies. Catherine would have had access to all of them, could have provided signature samples to a skilled forger. Creating backdated contracts that appeared legitimate would be trivial for someone with Sterling's resources. His voice came out hollow. "Why are you telling me this?" The answer took long enough that Marcus wondered if she'd hung up. Then Catherine's voice returned, quieter than before, carrying an edge of desperation. "Because despite everything, despite the lies and the betrayal, What I felt for you was real. I didn't come to Connecticut to spy on you, Marcus. I came because I was tired of being Catherine Sterling, tired of the corporate warfare and family pressure and artificial world where people only valued me for my last name and my position. I wanted to know what it felt like to be loved for myself, not for what I represented. The explanation sounded too convenient, too calculated to absolve her of responsibility. So you lied about your entire identity and stole my work? That's an interesting definition of love. Catherine's voice cracked, the first genuine emotion he'd heard from her since she'd walked into the hangar conference room. I didn't steal your work. Evan did. 3 months ago, he found out about us, confronted me, threatened to expose everything if I didn't come back to Sterling. I tried to protect you by leaving quietly, but he'd already gotten access to my laptop, found your blueprints in my personal files where I'd saved them because I was proud of what you were developing. He took them without my knowledge, launched the EcoJet program to force me back into the company by giving me no choice but to defend Sterling's reputation or admit I'd been feeding information to a competitor. Marcus's analytical mind wanted to dissect the statement, find the logical flaws, identify the manipulation. But another part of him, the part that had loved Kate Miller, that had opened his home and his family to a woman who'd seemed genuine, wanted desperately to believe her. That tension between engineering logic and emotional need had defined his relationship with Catherine from the beginning. He'd ignored red flags because he'd wanted the fairy tale, the second chance at partnership after Sarah's death. He forced his voice to stay level, analytical. If that's true, if you really didn't intend to steal my work, then help me prove it. Testify against Evan, provide evidence of his theft. Give me the ammunition I need to fight Sterling in court. The silence stretched longer this time, painful in its implications. When Catherine spoke again, her voice carried the weight of someone caught between impossible choices. If I testify against Evan, he'll destroy Sterling Aerospace. The company has been operating on the edge of solvency for 2 years. The EcoJet program represents our last chance to secure enough contracts to stay competitive with the major manufacturers. If we lose that technology, if the lawsuit delays production or forces us to pay royalties, we'll be bankrupt within 18 months. 3,000 employees will lose their jobs. My father spent his life building that company. I can't be the one who destroys. Marcus stood, his chair rolling backward and hitting the wall, his voice rising despite his efforts at control. But you can watch Evan destroy me? Watch him use forged documents and false testimony to paint me as a thief while he steals my work. That's where your moral line lands? Catherine's answer came through tears now, her professional composure finally shattering. I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is. I love you, Marcus. I love Lily. The 5 years I spent in your house were the happiest of my life, and I threw them away because I'm a coward who couldn't choose between the life I wanted and the responsibilities I was born into. I'm trying to protect you the only way I can, by warning you that fighting Evan will destroy everything you've built. The call ended before Marcus could respond, Catherine hanging up and leaving him standing in his office with rage and grief and confusion, battling for dominance. His phone showed 9:47 p.m., the evening gone to documentation and legal planning and revelations that kept rewriting his understanding of the past 5 years. A soft knock came from the office door. Lily stood in the doorway, her pajamas printed with equations and engineering diagrams, a gift from last Christmas. Her eyes were red, evidence she'd been crying while doing homework, processing her own grief over Kate's departure and the revealed deception. Her voice came out small, younger than her 16 years. I heard you yelling. Was that Kate? Catherine, whoever she really is? Marcus moved to his daughter, pulling her into a hug that felt like the only solid thing in a world gone liquid and unstable. Yeah, She called to warn me that Sterling is going to fight dirty if I sue them. Forged documents, false testimony, everything they need to destroy my credibility and claim I stole from them instead of the other way around. Lily pulled back enough to look up at him, her expression fierce despite the tears. What are you going to do? The question deserved honesty, the kind of truth-telling that respected Lily's intelligence and her right to understand the stakes. I don't know yet. If I fight them and lose, we could lose everything. The house, my job, your college fund. But if I don't fight them, they get away with stealing 2 years of my work, and I prove to the world that you can exploit people without consequences as long as you have enough money and power. Lily's arms tightened around him, her voice muffled against his chest. We'll figure it out, Dad. We always do. You and me, we're a team. We survived Mom dying. We survived you working 2 jobs to pay medical bills. We survived everything life threw at us. We'll survive this too. The confidence in her voice, the absolute certainty that they would find a way through this crisis, broke something in Marcus's chest. He'd tried so hard to protect her from adult problems, to shield her from the ugliness of financial struggle and corporate warfare and romantic betrayal. But Lily had grown up watching him handle impossible situations through persistence and careful planning. She'd learned resilience by example, absorbed the lesson that problems got solved through systematic analysis and refusal to quit even when the odds looked insurmountable. They stood together in the office doorway, father and daughter, against a world that had suddenly revealed itself as more hostile than either had imagined. Outside, October darkness had settled over Connecticut, the suburban quiet broken only by distant traffic and the sound of a neighbor's dog barking. Inside Marcus Hayes's modest 3-bedroom house, battle plans formed and reformed. Legal strategies evolved and discarded, while 2 people who'd lost too much already prepared to risk what remained on the principle that theft deserved consequences regardless of the thief's resources. Marcus's phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Albert Miller. Reviewed the documents Lily sent. You have a strong case, but Catherine's warning about countermeasures is credible. We need to talk strategy tomorrow. This is going to get ugly before it gets better. The message felt like validation and threat combined, confirming that Marcus's evidence would hold up, while warning that Sterling's resources could still crush him through attrition and manufactured evidence. David versus Goliath, indeed, except this Goliath had lawyers instead of armor and used courtroom procedure instead of physical combat. Lily had fallen asleep against his shoulder, her breathing steady and peaceful in the way that only came to teenagers who could shut down their anxieties through sheer exhaustion. Marcus carried her to her bedroom, tucking her in like he'd done when she was 6 and afraid of the dark after Sarah's death. She'd grown up too fast, forced into premature maturity by loss and circumstance. Now she was facing another adult crisis, another situation where the world proved itself less fair than children deserved. In his own bedroom, Marcus stripped off his clothes and crawled under covers that still smelled faintly of Catherine's perfume, that expensive scent he'd never questioned. The empty space beside him felt enormous, a physical manifestation of the betrayal that had gutted his ability to trust. He'd let her in completely, shared his work and his home and his daughter, believed the performance because he'd wanted so desperately for it to be real. Sleep came in fragments between analyzing legal strategies and replaying 5 years of memories through the lens of deception. Every conversation about his work now looked like intelligence gathering. Every interested question about his engineering challenges became evidence of systematic extraction. Even moments that had felt intimate and genuine, late-night conversations about dreams and fears, quiet mornings drinking coffee before work, were tainted by the knowledge that Catherine had been playing a role the entire time. Morning arrived too early, sunlight filtering through curtains and Marcus's phone alarm dragging him into consciousness. His body ached like he'd worked a double shift wrestling engine components, muscles tight from stress and insufficient sleep. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen, evidence that Lily had activated the programmable pot before heading to school. Marcus moved through his morning routine mechanically. Shower, shave, coveralls, work boots. The face in the bathroom mirror looked older than 52. Gray hair more prominent, lines deeper around eyes that held exhaustion and determination in equal measure. He'd been an Air Force maintenance officer, had kept fighter jets operational in hostile environments under impossible timelines. He'd raised a daughter alone while working full-time and carrying medical debt that had taken 5 years to clear. He'd survived losses that would have broken weaker men. Sterling Aerospace was about to learn that Marcus Hayes didn't quit just because the odds looked bad. They'd stolen his work, betrayed his trust, threatened his livelihood, but they'd underestimated the particular stubbornness that came from 2 decades of military service and 15 years of solving problems that everyone else had declared impossible. The drive to Montgomery Aviation took him past familiar landmarks, the diner where he'd first met Catherine, the church where they'd gotten married, the park where they'd walked with Lily on summer evenings. Each location carried memories that now felt like carefully constructed lies, performances designed to make him lower his guard and share his vulnerabilities. At the hangar, morning shift was already underway, mechanics and engineers moving through pre-flight checks and maintenance procedures with the choreographed efficiency that came from repetition and training. Marcus's team greeted him with the casual acknowledgement of co-workers who'd worked together long enough to read moods and know when to leave someone alone. Word had spread about his divorce. Small companies didn't keep secrets well, but nobody mentioned it directly. Rich Walsh found Marcus in the break room pouring coffee into a travel mug, the early morning ritual that preceded the daily production meeting. Rich had been Marcus's friend for 30 years, their Air Force careers overlapping before they'd both ended up at Montgomery through different paths. At 48, Rich carried the comfortable weight of someone who'd given up fighting age, his hair thinning and his gut expanding despite his wife's efforts at healthy meal planning. Rich's voice carried concern beneath the casual tone. "Heard you signed the papers yesterday. You doing okay?" Marcus considered several responses before settling on honesty. "Kate wasn't who I thought she was. Turns out she's Catherine Sterling, Chief Operating Officer at Sterling Aerospace." The coffee cup in Rich's hand stopped halfway to his mouth, his eyes widening. "Sterling? As in our primary competitor? The company that's been undercutting our bids and poaching our engineers?" Marcus nodded, exhaustion making him more direct than usual. "Same one. And she stole my bypass duct design. The EcoJet engine they announced 2 weeks ago? That's my work, specifications and all. I have timestamps and patent filings proving I developed it first." Rich set his coffee down, his expression cycling through shock and anger before landing on grim calculation. "Marcus, if that's true, if you can prove they stole your design, you're sitting on a major intellectual property case. But Sterling has resources that could drag you through court until you're bankrupt. What are you planning to do?" The question everyone kept asking, the decision Marcus kept deferring while gathering information and building evidence. "Fight them. Miller is reviewing my documentation now, but the evidence is solid. I developed that engine design on my own time using my own resources. Sterling took it and claimed it as theirs. That's theft. And I'm not letting them get away with it just because they're bigger and richer." Rich's hand came down on Marcus's shoulder, the weight familiar from decades of friendship. "You need help. Money, testimony, technical review. You ask. Your family, Marcus. We don't let family fight alone." The support felt like oxygen after drowning, validation that Marcus's decision to fight wasn't insane, despite the odds. He'd spent too long isolated, first by Sarah's death, and then by his relationship with Catherine, who'd systematically separated him from support networks and community ties. Having someone stand with him, even just in principle, made the impossible odds feel slightly less crushing. The production meeting ran long, budget discussions and timeline pressures consuming the morning. Marcus's mind drifted, analyzing legal strategies and evidence compilation, while his body went through the motions of engineering review and status updates. By lunch, he'd received 3 calls from Miller's office, paralegal staff requesting additional documentation and technical specifications to build the case file. Afternoon brought unexpected interruption. A knock on Marcus's office door, followed by Gabriel Wolf's arrival. The test pilot looked exactly like recruitment posters for military aviation, tall and confident, with the particular swagger that came from flying experimental aircraft at the edge of their performance envelopes. Seeing him triggered visceral anger, memory of finding him with Catherine still fresh enough to make Marcus's hands clench. Gabriel's voice carried something that might have been respect or calculation. "Hayes, got a minute to talk?" Marcus considered throwing him out, letting years of Air Force discipline override the civilian impulse toward violence. Instead, he gestured to the visitor chair, keeping his desk between them. "Make it quick, I've got work." Gabriel sat, his movements carrying the economy of someone comfortable in his body. "I heard about the divorce, and about Catherine's real identity. I need you to know, I didn't know who she was when I crossed that line. She told me she was separated, that you two had been over for months. I'm not making excuses, but I wouldn't have touched another man's wife if I'd known the truth." The explanation sounded genuine, carried weight that suggested Gabriel had his own code about loyalty and boundaries. "Why are you telling me this?" Gabriel leaned forward, his expression serious. "Because I'm testifying in your lawsuit. Catherine called me this morning, tried to convince me to stay quiet about what I know. But I've seen your engine design, Marcus. I flew the test protocol on Montgomery's simulator using your specifications. That bypass duct technology is revolutionary, could change the entire regional aviation industry. Sterling didn't develop that. You did. And I'm not staying silent while they steal your work." The lawsuit filed on a gray November morning, 3 weeks after the divorce papers had dried and Marcus Hayes had stopped expecting sleep to come easily. Albert Miller's paralegal had compiled documentation into a filing that ran 47 pages of exhibits and technical specifications, each timestamp and CAD model building an irrefutable timeline of independent invention. The complaint landed on Sterling Aerospace's corporate counsel like a bomb designed to detonate slowly, giving them time to recognize the damage before the real destruction began. Miller called at 8 a.m. with news that arrived faster than Marcus had anticipated. "They're countersuing. Filed this morning. Probably had it ready the moment they saw our complaint coming. Marcus, it's worse than Catherine warned. They're claiming you worked as an undisclosed consultant for Sterling 3 years ago, that you stole their proprietary research and incorporated it into your designs. They have contracts with your signature, non-disclosure agreements, payment records showing wire transfers to your bank account." Marcus's hand tightened on his phone, the other gripping his kitchen counter hard enough that his knuckles went white. "That's impossible. I've never consulted for Sterling, never signed any agreement with them, never received payments from their company. Those documents are forgeries." Miller's voice carried the weariness of a lawyer who'd seen corporations manufacture evidence before. "I know that. You know that. But the signatures look authentic enough to pass initial scrutiny, and the wire transfer records show deposits to an account with your name and social security number. We'll need forensic document examiners and financial investigators to prove the fraud. And that's going to cost money you don't have while Sterling drags this through discovery for the next 2 years. The financial reality hit like turbine failure at takeoff, critical and potentially catastrophic. Marcus had savings, enough to cover Lily's first year at college, and maybe 6 months of legal fees if he stretched. Beyond that lay the house, retirement accounts that would take penalties for early withdrawal, the possibility of bankruptcy that would destroy his credit and eliminate any chance of rebuilding, even if he eventually won. But the alternative meant letting Sterling steal his work, meant teaching Lily that theft went unpunished if the thief had enough resources, meant spending the rest of his career knowing he'd backed down because fighting back was expensive. The engineering part of his brain ran cost-benefit analysis and came up with numbers that said fighting was irrational. The part that had survived 20 years of military service and 10 years of single fatherhood said some principles mattered more than rational economic calculation. His response came out flat, determined. Get me the names of the experts we need. I'll find the money somehow. We're not backing down because Sterling learned to forge documents. The call ended with Miller promising to compile a list of forensic specialists and financial investigators, each one representing hourly rates that would consume Marcus's savings like fuel burn at maximum thrust. He stood in his kitchen staring at nothing, calculating timelines and resources, while the coffee maker gurgled through its cycle, and morning sunlight illuminated the empty chair where Catherine had sat for 5 years. Lily appeared in the doorway, already dressed for school, her backpack slung over one shoulder. They filed the countersuit? Marcus nodded, watching his daughter process the implications with the quick analysis she'd inherited from both parents. Yeah, claiming I stole from them, that I was a consultant who violated non-disclosure agreements. It's all fabricated, but proving that will cost more than we have. Lily set her backpack down, moving to the kitchen table with the particular determination that appeared when she'd decided something mattered enough to fight for. How much do we need? The honesty she deserved required numbers Marcus didn't want to say out loud. Miller estimates $200,000 for expert witnesses, depositions, discovery costs, and trial preparation if it goes that far. Maybe more if Sterling really commits to burying us in paperwork and procedural delays. Lily's face went pale, but her voice stayed steady. That's my college fund, plus the house equity. Marcus felt something crack in his chest, the weight of fatherhood and responsibility crushing against the need to fight back against theft. Which is why we need to think carefully about whether this is worth it. You've worked too hard to have your education held hostage to my pride. The look Lily gave him could have cut titanium, fierce and unyielding. This isn't pride, Dad. This is justice. They stole your work, and if we let them win because fighting back costs money, then we're teaching everyone that theft is fine as long as you're rich enough to defend it. Use the college fund. I'll get scholarships, student loans, whatever it takes. But we're not letting them destroy you without a fight. The conviction in her voice, the absolute certainty that fighting mattered more than the financial cost, reminded Marcus why he'd survived Sarah's death and the years of struggle that followed. Lily had learned resilience by watching him refuse to quit when situations looked impossible, had absorbed the lesson that some things mattered more than easy paths and comfortable choices. He pulled her into a hug that felt like the only solid thing in a world gone uncertain. We do this, there's no guarantee we win. Sterling has resources to drag this out until we're broke, even if we're right about everything. Lily's arms tightened around him, her voice muffled against his shoulder. Then we fight until we're broke. At least we'll know we tried, that we didn't just roll over because they expected us to. The conversation ended with Marcus calling Miller back to authorize hiring the forensic experts to begin the discovery process that would consume his savings and probably his house before the case reached any resolution. The decision felt simultaneously reckless and necessary, the kind of choice that defined character when comfortable options were no longer available. Work provided distraction, the familiar challenges of maintaining aircraft, and managing engineering teams requiring enough focus to quiet the louder anxieties about legal warfare and financial destruction. Marcus buried himself in turbine inspections and maintenance schedules, finding comfort in problems that had technical solutions and predictable outcomes. Rich Walsh appeared periodically with coffee and silent support, the kind of friendship that knew when conversation helped and when presence was enough. The afternoon brought another interruption, this time Catherine's voice on his cell phone carrying urgency that cut through his determination to maintain distance. "Marcus, I need to see you. Not for me, for you. I have information about Evan's countersuit that you need to hear before you waste money on forensic analysis." Every instinct screamed to hang up, to maintain the boundary between his life and the woman who'd systematically destroyed his ability to trust. "Why would I believe anything you tell me? You've lied about everything else." Catherine's breath came ragged over the connection, exhaustion or emotion making her voice unsteady. "Because Evan will destroy you if you fight him head-on. But I can help you avoid that destruction if you're willing to hear me out. Please, Marcus, give me 2 hours. Meet me somewhere neutral. Bring a witness if you want. Record the conversation, but listen to what I have to say." Marcus's analytical mind warred with emotional damage, logic suggesting that information was valuable regardless of the source, while his heart insisted that trusting Catherine again would be catastrophic stupidity. The engineer won, overriding personal feeling with strategic calculation. His response came out cold. "Route 1 Diner, 6 o'clock. I'm bringing Rich Walsh as witness, and I'm recording everything. You try any manipulation, and I walk." The diner was the same place where they'd first met after Marcus had fixed her staged breakdown on I-95, the location carrying ironic weight that wasn't lost on either of them. Marcus arrived early, claiming the same booth where Catherine had convinced him she was a simple accountant looking for honest connection. Rich sat across from him, solid and supportive, his presence a reminder that Marcus wasn't alone even when everything felt like quicksand. Catherine walked in at precisely 6 o'clock, her appearance striking the balance between her two identities. Not the corporate executive from Sterling's website, but not the casual Kate Miller either. Dark jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than Marcus spent on clothes in a year. Her hair down, but styled with the kind of precision that required professional maintenance. She looked exhausted, shadows under her eyes suggesting sleep was as elusive for her as it was for Marcus. She slid into the booth beside Rich, keeping distance from Marcus, her hands visible on the table in a gesture that felt like peace offering. "Thank you for coming. I know you have every reason to refuse." Marcus pulled out his phone, setting it on the table with the voice recorder app active. "You have 2 hours to convince me this isn't another manipulation. Start talking." Catherine's eyes went to the phone, then to Rich, finally settling on Marcus with something that might have been genuine regret. "The consulting contracts Evan filed are sophisticated forgeries, created by a specialist who works exclusively for corporate litigation defense. Your signatures came from documents I provided, mortgage refinancing papers, tax returns, insurance policies you signed at our house. The wire transfers went to an account Evan opened in your name using identity theft, deposited money and immediately withdrew it to create a paper trail without you ever seeing the funds." Rich's voice cut in, skeptical. "Why are you telling us this? If it's true, you're admitting to providing materials for identity fraud and evidence fabrication." Catherine's hands twisted together, the first nervous gesture Marcus had ever seen from her. "Because watching Marcus get destroyed by my brother's corruption is a line I can't cross. I lied about who I was. I failed to protect his research. I chose my family's company over the man I loved. But I'm not standing by while Evan frames him for crimes he didn't commit." Marcus leaned forward, his voice hard. "What do you want in exchange for this information? There's always a price with you people." The words landed like physical blows, Catherine flinching but not retreating. I want you to stop fighting Evan directly. The countersuit is designed to bankrupt you through legal fees while destroying your reputation in the aerospace industry. Every month you spend in litigation is a month he's draining your resources and poisoning your professional credibility. But there's another way to win that doesn't require you to match his legal spending. Rich's skepticism deepened, his arms crossing. What other way? Sterling has your engine design. They've announced it publicly. They're moving forward with production. How does Marcus win without litigation? Catherine reached into her bag, pulling out a USB drive that she placed on the table between them. By proving that Evan's version doesn't work. The modifications he made to Marcus's design, the 15% changes he ordered to avoid direct patent infringement, introduced thermal instabilities that cause catastrophic failures under sustained, high-power operation. Gabriel Wolf discovered it during test flights 3 weeks ago. The engine nearly exploded at 30,000 feet. Would have killed him if he hadn't shut it down immediately. Marcus's hand moved toward the drive, then stopped, suspicion overriding curiosity. Why would Evan announce a product that doesn't work? Catherine's answer came with the weariness of someone who'd lived inside corporate dysfunction too long. Because he's desperate. Sterling Aerospace has been operating on the edge of bankruptcy for 2 years. We've lost 3 major contracts to competitors who undercut our bids, seen our market share drop by 40%, watched our stock price crater. The EcoJet announcement was supposed to restore investor confidence and secure enough pre-orders to keep us solvent. Evan thought he could fix the thermal problems before anyone noticed. Instead, he created a death trap that will destroy the company when the failures become public. Rich picked up the USB drive, turning it over in his thick fingers. What's on this? Catherine's voice dropped, barely audible over the diner's ambient noise. Test flight data from Gabriel's near disaster. Engineering reports documenting the thermal instabilities. Internal memos showing Evan knew about the problems and ordered the team to suppress the findings. Email chains proving he instructed fabrication of the consulting contracts. Everything you need to prove corporate fraud, evidence tampering, and reckless endangerment of test pilots. Marcus felt the world tilt, his engineer's mind immediately grasping the implications, while his emotional core struggled with the source. You're handing us evidence that will destroy Sterling Aerospace? Your father's company? Your family legacy? Why? Catherine's eyes met his directly, holding contact despite the pain visible in her expression. Because my father built that company on integrity and innovation, not lies and theft. Because Evan has corrupted everything Howard Sterling stood for in his pursuit of short-term survival. And because 3,000 employees deserve better than working for a company that's building engines designed to fail catastrophically in flight. The USB drive sat on the table like a bomb, its innocuous appearance concealing the explosive potential of the data it contained. Marcus's hand hovered over it, logic and emotion battling for dominance. The information could end the lawsuit, prove his case without burning through his savings, potentially destroy Sterling's credibility and force recognition of his original work. But accepting help from Catherine felt like condoning her betrayal, like agreeing that the ends justified her means. Rich's voice cut through the internal debate. Marcus, you need to verify this independently before you trust anything she says. For all we know, that drive is filled with more fabricated evidence designed to trap you further. Catherine nodded, her agreement immediate. You should verify everything. Give it to your lawyer, have him review it with experts, check the metadata and file origins. I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. I'm giving you tools to verify the truth independently. Marcus picked up the drive, its weight insignificant, but its potential impact massive. If this is real, if Evan really did falsify evidence and build a defective engine, why not just go to the FAA yourself? Why involve me? Catherine's laugh carried no humor, just exhausted recognition of her own limitations. Because I'm the COO who signed off on the test protocols, who approved the EcoJet announcement, whose name is on the corporate filings. If I report Evan, I'm admitting my own complicity in fraud that endangered lives. I'll lose my position, probably face criminal charges, definitely destroy what's left of my reputation. But if the information comes from you, from an independent engineer who discovered the problems through proper investigation, the FAA will listen and act. The calculus was brutal and clear. Catherine was offering Marcus the weapons to destroy Sterling Aerospace, while protecting herself from the worst consequences of her brother's corruption. Self-serving and strategic, the kind of compromise that let her claim moral high ground while avoiding personal sacrifice. Yet the information itself, if genuine, could achieve everything Marcus needed without bankrupting his family in the process. His decision came from pragmatism rather than forgiveness. I'll have Miller review this with experts. If it checks out, if the data proves what you claim, I'll use it. But this doesn't absolve you, Catherine. You still lied for 5 years, still failed to protect my work, still chose your company over our marriage. Catherine's nod carried acceptance of the judgment. I know. I'm not asking for forgiveness or redemption. I'm trying to prevent Evan from destroying both of us while covering up engineering fraud that could kill people. That's the best I can offer. She stood, preparing to leave, then paused with one hand on the table. Gabriel wants to talk to you. He has his own testimony about the test flight failures, and he's willing to go on record with the FAA if your investigation confirms the problems. Between his pilot expertise and your engineering analysis, you'll have credible evidence that Sterling's version doesn't work, regardless of who developed the original design. The offer hung in the air, another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Gabriel Wolf had already volunteered to testify about Marcus's original work. Adding his technical testimony about Sterling's failures would create a compelling narrative. Original inventor versus corporate theft, functional design versus dangerous modifications, individual integrity versus institutional corruption. Marcus's response came carefully measured. Tell Gabriel I'll call him tomorrow. And Catherine, if this is another manipulation, if that drive contains anything except what you claim, I will destroy you along with Evan. No mercy, no compromise. Understand? Catherine's eyes held his for a long moment, something flickering there that might have been respect or resignation. I understand. And for what it's worth, the 5 years we had were real for me, even if the identity was false. Loving you and Lily wasn't part of the plan. It was the consequence of spending time with genuinely good people. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to choose that life over the obligations I was raised to honor. She walked out into the November evening, leaving Marcus and Rich alone in the booth with a USB drive that might contain salvation or further disaster. The waitress approached with coffee refills, her timing suggesting she'd been waiting for the tense conversation to end before interrupting. Marcus waved her away, his appetite gone, and his mind already racing through verification protocols and expert consultations. Rich spoke first, his voice carrying the practical skepticism of someone who'd seen enough corporate warfare to distrust convenient solutions. Could be a trap, could be genuine. Either way, we verify independently before you use any of that information. Marcus pocketed the drive, his engineer's discipline overriding emotional turbulence. Agreed. Miller gets it tomorrow morning with instructions to verify metadata, cross-check file origins, have experts review the technical data for authenticity. If it's real, we use it. If it's fabricated, we document the attempt to mislead and add it to evidence of Sterling's fraud. The drive back to his house took Marcus past the suburban landscape that had become familiar over 15 years. Strip malls and housing developments, the gradual transformation of Connecticut farmland into bedroom communities serving New York's northern corridor. His phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "Working late at engineering lab. Don't wait up. Love you." The message carried normalcy that felt surreal against the evening's revelations. His daughter pursuing her education while her father navigated corporate warfare and evidence of fraud that could reshape multiple lives. Marcus had tried to shield Lily from the worst details, but she'd earned the right to know everything through her own investigation that had exposed Catherine's real identity. Tomorrow he'd tell her about the USB drive, about Catherine's offer and Gabriel's willingness to testify, about the possibility that they might win without bankrupting themselves in the process. At home, Marcus uploaded the drive's contents to his computer with the kind of caution normally reserved for handling explosive ordnance. The files appeared legitimate at first glance. Test flight telemetry data, engineering reports formatted in Sterling's corporate templates, email chains with headers that showed internal routing through Sterling's servers. But appearances meant nothing in an era where sophisticated forgery could manufacture convincing evidence from whole cloth. He called Miller despite the late hour, leaving a voicemail about the evening's meeting and the drive's contents. "I need a full forensic review before we touch any of this information. Metadata analysis, expert verification of the technical data, authentication of the email chains. If it's real, it's devastating to Sterling's case. If it's fake, it's evidence of additional fraud. Either way, we need professionals to make that determination." Sleep was impossible, despite exhaustion. Marcus's mind cycling through possibilities and implications until morning light forced him out of bed and into the shower. The routine of preparing for work provided structure, the familiar motions of coveralls and steel-toed boots grounding him in the physical reality of his life as an aircraft maintenance engineer. Whatever happened with lawsuits and evidence and corporate fraud, planes still needed maintenance, and turbine blades still required inspection. At Montgomery Aviation, the day proceeded with manufactured normalcy, Marcus moving through quality reviews and production meetings, while his thoughts fragmented between immediate work and the larger implications of Catherine's information. Gabriel Wolf found him during lunch break, the test pilot's presence in the engineering section unusual enough to draw attention from the team. Gabriel's opening carried directness that suggested military background. "Catherine said she gave you the flight test data. I want you to know that everything on that drive about the engine failures is accurate. I nearly died when that prototype grenaded itself at cruise altitude." The thermal instabilities in Evan's modified design are fundamental, not something that can be patched with software updates or minor adjustments. The whole concept is flawed. Marcus gestured to his office, seeking privacy for a conversation that could have legal implications. "Walk me through what happened. Technical details, not summary." Inside the small office, Gabriel settled into the visitor chair with the ease of someone comfortable in confined spaces. "We were running acceptance testing on Sterling's EcoJet prototype, standard protocol for validating performance specifications. Everything looked normal through takeoff and initial climb. At 28,000 feet, I advanced to cruise power settings, 85% thrust, standard configuration for efficiency testing." His hands moved as he spoke, sketching invisible shapes that mapped the technical sequence. Exhaust gas temperatures started climbing outside normal parameters within 30 seconds. I reduced power, assuming we had an instrumentation error, but the climb continued. By the time I called abort and initiated shutdown, we were 15 degrees over the thermal limit for the turbine materials. Another 20 seconds, and we would have had catastrophic blade failure at altitude. Marcus pulled out a notepad, sketching the turbine cross-section from memory. Where specifically was the thermal accumulation occurring? Gabriel leaned forward, examining the sketch. Primary issue was in the high-pressure turbine section, exactly where Evan modified your original bypass geometry. Your design routed cooling airflow through specific passages that maintained thermal boundaries. His modifications disrupted that airflow pattern, created hot spots that the materials can't sustain under continuous operation. The technical explanation aligned with Marcus's own analysis of the EcoJet specifications he'd reviewed after Sterling's announcement. The 15% modification Evan had ordered, ostensibly to avoid direct patent infringement, had eliminated critical cooling passages that Marcus had spent months optimizing. A competent thermodynamics engineer would have caught the problem immediately. But Evan had apparently ordered the changes without consulting his technical team or running proper validation analysis. Marcus's voice carried the flat certainty of an engineer identifying catastrophic design flaws. That engine can't be fixed with minor modifications. The entire high-pressure section needs redesign to restore proper thermal management. We're talking months of engineering work and complete prototype rebuild. Gabriel nodded, his expression grim, which is why Evan ordered the test data suppressed and told the team to proceed with production planning. He's betting he can secure enough contracts and initial payments before anyone discovers the engine doesn't work as advertised. By the time customers start experiencing failures, he hopes to have enough cash reserves to survive the lawsuits and recalls. The calculated cynicism of the strategy was breathtaking, knowingly selling defective engines that could fail catastrophically in flight, gambling that short-term cash infusion would offset long-term liability. Marcus had spent 20 years in military aviation, where safety protocols were sacred, where every component underwent rigorous testing because lives depended on reliability. The idea of deliberately fielding equipment known to be dangerous violated every principle he'd absorbed in 2 decades of service. His response came cold, with controlled fury. "You're willing to testify to this? On record? With the FAA? Potentially in court?" Gabriel's answer carried matching intensity. "I'm a test pilot, Marcus. My job is identifying problems before they kill people. Evan tried to make me complicit in covering up a design flaw that could down aircraft and murder passengers. I quit Sterling 2 days after that flight, and I'm prepared to tell anyone who'll listen exactly why their EcoJet is a death trap waiting to happen." The commitment was valuable, but carried risk. Gabriel's testimony alone might not overcome Sterling's resources and legal maneuvering. Combined with the technical data Catherine had provided, verified by independent experts and supported by Marcus's own engineering analysis, it became devastating evidence of corporate fraud and reckless endangerment. Marcus made his decision with the same calculation he'd used planning maintenance procedures under combat conditions. "I'm having forensic experts verify the data Catherine gave me. If it checks out, if everything you're telling me is supported by that evidence, we go to the FAA together. Your testimony as test pilot who experienced the failure, my analysis as the engineer who developed the original functional design, Catherine's internal documents proving Evan knew about the problems. That's enough to trigger a formal investigation and ground Sterling's production program." Gabriel extended his hand across the desk, the gesture carrying military formality. "I'm with you. Whatever you need, technical testimony, flight data, detailed failure analysis, I'll provide it. Evan Sterling doesn't get to kill people to save his company's stock price." The alliance felt solid in ways Marcus's relationship with Catherine never had, built on shared professional standards rather than romantic deception. 2 men who'd spent careers in aviation safety, facing corporate corruption that threatened to undermine the industry's fundamental integrity. The fight had shifted from personal vindication to professional obligation, from recovering stolen intellectual property to preventing potential disasters that could kill innocent passengers. Miller called that afternoon with preliminary analysis of the USB drive's contents. The metadata checks out as authentic. Files were created on Sterling's internal servers. Email headers show legitimate routing through their corporate network. Technical data matches known Sterling formats and protocols. I've sent the flight test telemetry to an independent aerospace engineer for verification, but initial review suggests this is genuine documentation of serious design flaws. Marcus felt tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying start to release. So Catherine was telling the truth. Evan really did build a defective engine and tried to cover it up. Miller's voice carried lawyer caution. The evidence suggests that yes, but we still need expert verification of the technical claims before we approach the FAA. If we accuse Sterling of building dangerous engines and we're wrong, they'll bury us in defamation suits. We need absolutely bulletproof analysis before we make any public allegations. The conversation continued through verification protocols and expert selection, Miller's methodical approach to evidence authentication providing structure to what could otherwise become reckless accusations. By the time Marcus hung up, a plan had formed. 2 weeks for comprehensive technical review, coordination with Gabriel's testimony, compilation of evidence that would survive Sterling's inevitable challenges. Then a formal submission to the FAA's certification office, triggering investigation that would ground the EcoJet program and validate Marcus's original design. Lily came home from school to find her father at the kitchen table, surrounded by technical documents and legal notepads, the visual manifestation of strategy that had evolved from defensive litigation to offensive revelation. She dropped her backpack, grabbed an apple from the refrigerator, settled into the chair that had been Kate's, with the casual appropriation of a teenager reclaiming family space. Her voice carried curiosity without judgment. Good news or bad news? Marcus looked up from computational fluid dynamics analysis, seeing his daughter's face and finding Sarah's intelligence looking back at him. Complicated news. Catherine gave us evidence that Sterling's version of my engine doesn't work, that it's actually dangerous. Gabriel Wolf is willing to testify about nearly dying during test flights. If the experts verify everything, we can go to the FAA instead of fighting through years of litigation. Lily processed the information with her usual quick analysis. So we win without spending the college fund on lawyers? The summary was reductive but essentially accurate. Maybe. If the evidence holds up, if the FAA takes it seriously, if Sterling can't find a way to discredit us before the investigation concludes. But yeah, it's a path to victory that doesn't require bankrupting ourselves first. Lily's smile carried relief and something fiercer, the satisfaction of seeing justice become possible. Then we follow that path. And Dad, when this is over, when people know you invented that engine design, you're going to be the one with companies offering contracts and research funding. Not Sterling. You. The expert verification took 12 days that stretched like months, each morning bringing Marcus to his computer to check for updates from the aerospace engineers and metallurgists Miller had hired to analyze Catherine's evidence. The technical reports arrived in fragments, thermal analysis confirming Gabriel's description of hotspot formation, material stress calculations validating the catastrophic failure risk, independent review of the test flight telemetry showing exhaust gas temperatures that exceeded design limits by margins no competent engineer would accept. Every piece strengthened the case that Sterling's EcoJet was fundamentally flawed, that Evan had knowingly suppressed safety data, that lives were at risk if the engine reached production. Miller's call came on day 13, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a lawyer who'd built an unassailable case. We have everything we need. 3 independent experts confirm the thermal instabilities would cause turbine blade failure under sustained cruise operation. The flight test data is authentic, unaltered, shows exactly what Gabriel described. Email evidence proves Evan ordered suppression of the safety findings. Marcus, this is smoking gun documentation of fraud and reckless endangerment. Marcus stood in his garage workshop, the space he'd converted into a home engineering lab years ago when Montgomery's budget constraints had pushed personal research to off hours. Tools hung on pegboards, a small lathe occupied one corner, CAD workstation sat on a desk assembled from salvaged aircraft mounting hardware. The physical manifestation of his career, the place where he'd developed the bypass duct design that had started this entire catastrophe. His response came measured, despite the adrenaline spiking through his system. What's the next step? How do we get this to the FAA without Sterling burying it? Miller had clearly anticipated the question, his answer immediate. Formal submission to the Aircraft Certification Office with copies to the Office of Accident Investigation. We include your technical analysis, expert verification, Gabriel's testimony, and Catherine's internal documents. The submission goes on record, becomes part of the public docket, can't be disappeared even if Sterling tries to suppress it politically. Once it's filed, the FAA is obligated to investigate. The mechanism was elegant in its simplicity. Use Sterling's own documentation against them, leverage the regulatory system's transparency requirements, force investigation through formal channels that resisted corporate influence, not litigation that Sterling could outlast through superior resources, but regulatory action that threatened their certification authority and ability to sell aircraft engines in the United States market. Marcus felt strategy crystallize, the scattered pieces of the past month organizing into coherent action. How long until we can file? Miller's keyboard clicked in the background, schedule coordination happening in real time. I need 2 days to format the submission properly, compile exhibits, draft the technical summary. Gabriel needs to provide sworn testimony. You need to write the engineering analysis explaining why your original design works and Sterling's modifications don't. We file Friday morning, and by Friday afternoon, this becomes a federal investigation that Sterling can't control. The timeline felt simultaneously too fast and painfully slow, urgency warring with the need for perfect execution. Marcus had spent his career in environments where mistakes could kill people. Fighter jet maintenance allowed no margin for error, no second chances when components failed at Mach speed and high altitude. This investigation would follow the same unforgiving standard. Every technical claim needing bulletproof support, because Sterling's survival depended on discrediting the allegations. He spent the next 48 hours writing technical analysis that translated complex thermodynamics into language regulators could understand without sacrificing engineering precision. The document grew to 37 pages of calculations and diagrams, each section building the argument that his original bypass duct design had achieved thermal management through careful airflow optimization, that Sterling's modifications had eliminated critical cooling passages, that the resulting hotspots would cause material failure under operational stress. He included computational fluid dynamics models, finite element analysis of thermal loads, metallurgical data on turbine blade temperature limits. Evidence so comprehensive that any engineer reviewing it would reach the same conclusion. Sterling's engine was a disaster waiting to happen. Lily read drafts during evening hours, her 16-year-old engineering knowledge already sophisticated enough to follow the arguments and identify unclear sections. Her questions sharpened his explanations, forced him to justify every assumption and calculation. By Thursday night, the analysis was complete, a technical document that represented everything Marcus had learned in 30 years of aerospace engineering, condensed into irrefutable demonstration of Sterling's incompetence and fraud. Friday morning arrived cold and clear, December having replaced November while Marcus had been consumed with evidence compilation. He dressed carefully, not coveralls, but the Brooks Brothers suit he'd worn to his wedding with Sarah, to her funeral, to the handful of formal occasions that had punctuated 25 years. The fabric felt strange after months of work clothes, the tie a constraint he'd never grown comfortable with despite decades of military service requiring proper uniform. Miller's office occupied the third floor of a renovated factory building in Hartford, the exposed brick and modern furniture reflecting Connecticut's awkward transition from industrial past to service economy present. Gabriel Wolfe sat in the waiting area when Marcus arrived, the test pilot similarly dressed for formal business, his military bearing evident in posture and grooming. They acknowledged each other with nods that carried weight of shared purpose, two men from different backgrounds united by professional obligation to prevent engineering fraud from killing people. The conference room held Miller and two paralegals, laptops open and documents organized with the precision of legal professionals preparing for battle. The submission to the FAA ran to 214 pages, including exhibits, Marcus's technical analysis, expert verifications, Gabriel's sworn testimony. Catherine's internal Sterling documents, forensic authentication reports proving the evidence's legitimacy. A complete case that would land on the Aircraft Certification Office's desk like an explosive device with a lit fuse. Miller walked them through the submission one final time, ensuring every signature was placed correctly, every exhibit properly marked, every technical claim supported by verifiable evidence. Once this is filed, there's no taking it back. The FAA will investigate. Sterling will fight back with everything they have, and this becomes public record that journalists and competitors can access. Marcus, Gabriel, you need to be certain you're ready for the attention and the blowback this will generate. Marcus thought about Lily's college fund still intact because they'd found a path that didn't require litigation, about the 3,000 Sterling employees who deserved better than working for a company building dangerous engines, about the passengers who would fly on aircraft powered by technology designed to fail catastrophically. The decision had stopped being personal somewhere during the expert verification process, had transformed into professional obligation that transcended revenge or vindication. His voice came steady, certain. File it. People's lives are worth more than Sterling's stock price or my desire to avoid attention. Gabriel's agreement followed immediately. File it. I didn't survive 20 years of test-flying experimental aircraft to watch corporate fraud turn commercial aviation into Russian roulette. Miller's paralegal executed the electronic filing at 9:47 a.m., the submission uploading to the FAA's docket management system with the bureaucratic efficiency that characterized federal record-keeping. Confirmation arrived 30 seconds later. Docket number FAA 20241-847. Matter: formal safety complaint regarding Sterling Aerospace EcoJet engine certification. Public record, permanent, unstoppable. The relief Marcus felt was physical, tension draining from shoulders and neck as the burden transferred from his individual responsibility to institutional investigation. Whatever happened next, he'd done everything possible to prevent disaster, have used every tool available to expose fraud and protect safety. The outcome was beyond his control now, subject to regulatory processes and political pressures he couldn't influence. But the submission existed. The evidence was public, and Sterling couldn't make it disappear, no matter how many lawyers they deployed. Miller broke the silence that had settled over the conference room. Now we wait. The FAA will acknowledge receipt within 72 hours, assign investigators within 2 weeks, likely contact you for additional information within a month. Sterling will file responses denying everything, probably claim you fabricated evidence or have commercial motives for attacking them. The investigation will take 6 to 18 months before any enforcement action. The timeline felt glacial compared to the urgency of preventing engine failures, but Marcus understood bureaucratic reality. Thorough investigation required time. Regulatory action demanded procedural care. Rushing produced mistakes that undermined credibility. Better to wait 18 months and achieve definitive results than rush to judgment and leave Sterling with appeals that could drag for decades. Gabriel stood, extending his hand to Marcus. Whatever happens with the investigation, you did the right thing. Engineers like us, we don't get to stay silent when we know something's dangerous. It's not in our DNA. The sentiment resonated with core truths Marcus had built his career around, the unspoken code that aviation professionals shared. Safety mattered more than convenience. Lives outweighed profits. Speaking up when you identified hazards was moral obligation, regardless of personal cost. Gabriel embodied those principles, despite his affair with Catherine, his willingness to testify transcending personal mistakes and focusing on professional responsibility. Marcus's handshake carried genuine respect. Thank you for your testimony. Without your flight test data and technical observations, this would have been my word against Sterling's resources. You gave us evidence they can't dismiss. The remainder of Friday passed in strange anticlimax, Marcus returning to Montgomery Aviation and normal work while the submission propagated through federal systems. News wouldn't break immediately. The FAA's docket was public but technical, the kind of bureaucratic record that only industry insiders monitored regularly. Eventually, journalists would notice, competitors would analyze the implications, Sterling would mount their defense. But for now, Marcus could return to turbine inspections and maintenance schedules, while investigation machinery began grinding through evidence evaluation. Rich Walsh found him in Hangar 7 during afternoon shift, the older engineer's presence a reminder of friendship that had survived decades and supported Marcus through the worst period of his life. "Filed the complaint?" Marcus nodded, using a torque wrench to secure turbine blade retaining nuts with the precise values specified in maintenance manuals. "This morning. 200 pages of evidence that Sterling's engine is fundamentally flawed, and Evan knew about the problems." Rich leaned against the engine stand, his bulk solid and reassuring. "What happens now?" The question deserved honesty about uncertainty. FAA investigates, probably takes a year or more. Meanwhile, I keep working, keep paying bills, keep being Lily's father. The submission is done. Everything else is out of my hands. Rich's voice carried approval beneath the gruff exterior. "Good. You did what needed doing. Exposed the fraud. Protected people who'd fly on those engines. Whatever Sterling throws back, you've got the moral high ground and technical evidence. That counts for something." The assessment was optimistic, but Marcus appreciated the support, the recognition that fighting back against institutional corruption mattered, even when outcomes remained uncertain. He'd spent his adult life in hierarchical systems, military and corporate, that demanded obedience and discouraged individual initiative. Speaking up against Sterling violated those institutional norms, risked his career and financial security, marked him as troublemaker rather than team player. But some principles transcended organizational loyalty. Some truths demanded voice regardless of professional consequences. The weekend arrived with Lily's insistence on celebration despite Marcus's protests that nothing was resolved yet. She dragged him to the diner on Route 1, the same location where he'd met Catherine and later confronted her about the evidence. Sitting in the familiar booth felt like reclaiming space that betrayal had contaminated, asserting that his life belonged to him rather than being defined by others' deceptions. Lily ordered pancakes and bacon with teenage appetite that never seemed satisfied, her enthusiasm infectious despite Marcus's exhaustion. "Dad, you took on $1 billion company and won." Even if the investigation takes forever, even if Sterling survives somehow, you proved that one person with truth and evidence can fight back against corporate fraud. That matters. The conviction in her voice, the absolute certainty that his actions carried meaning beyond immediate outcomes, reminded Marcus why he'd survived Sarah's death and the years of single parenthood. Lily had learned to see challenges as problems requiring solutions, rather than obstacles justifying surrender, had absorbed resilience through watching her father refuse to quit when situations looked impossible. Now she was reflecting that lesson back, reminding him that the fight itself demonstrated values worth preserving. His response came quieter than her enthusiasm warranted. "I just did what any competent engineer would do when they identified safety problems. Nothing heroic about it." Lily's expression shifted, teenage lightness replaced by surprising maturity. "That's exactly what makes it heroic, Dad. You didn't do it for glory or revenge. You did it because it was right, because people's lives mattered more than your comfort or safety. That's the definition of integrity." The conversation continued through breakfast, Lily updating him on college applications and engineering projects, while Marcus tried to maintain normalcy despite the upheaval of recent months. MIT and Caltech remained her top choices, both schools representing pathways to aerospace engineering careers that would dwarf anything Marcus had achieved. He'd built engines and maintained aircraft, had contributed incremental improvements to existing technology. Lily would design the next generation of propulsion systems, would push boundaries Marcus could only imagine from his position in the industry's maintenance tier. Pride mixed with melancholy, the bittersweet recognition that his daughter was surpassing him academically and professionally, while still needing him as father and anchor. Sarah would have handled this transition better, would have known how to celebrate Lily's achievements while managing her own emotions about their daughter's approaching independence. Marcus stumbled through parenting by instinct and stubborn persistence, hoping competence at engineering translated somehow to adequacy at fatherhood. Monday brought the first public response to the FAA submission, a terse statement from Sterling Aerospace calling the allegations baseless and motivated by commercial jealousy. Their PR team had clearly prepared for this possibility, the response generic enough to work for any complaint while avoiding specific engagement with the technical evidence. Industry publications picked up the story, aerospace trade journals running articles about the safety complaint against Sterling's new engine program. Marcus's name appeared in the coverage, described variously as former Sterling consultant, independent engineer, or disgruntled inventor, depending on which narrative the publication favored. The attention felt invasive. Journalists calling Montgomery Aviation and Marcus's home number seeking comment or additional details. Miller had prepared him for media interest, advised saying nothing that could compromise the investigation or provide Sterling with ammunition for defamation claims. Marcus followed the guidance, declining all interview requests and referring reporters to the public docket, where his technical analysis was available for review. Catherine called Tuesday evening, her voice carrying exhaustion that suggested she'd spent days managing Sterling's internal crisis. The board is in chaos. Evan is trying to blame me for the leaked documents, claiming I sabotaged the company out of personal vendetta. I've resigned as COO effective immediately, before he could fire me publicly. Marcus felt no satisfaction at her professional destruction, just weary recognition that consequences were spreading beyond the people who'd initiated the fraud. What will you do? The question seemed to surprise her, silence stretching before she answered. I don't know yet. I have savings, investments, enough wealth that employment isn't urgent, but losing Sterling feels like losing the last connection to my father, to the legacy he built before Evan corrupted it. I know that sounds privileged when you're fighting to keep your house, but it's still loss. The comparison was absurd. Catherine's voluntary resignation from executive position versus Marcus's potential bankruptcy defending against fabricated charges. But he understood grief transcended economic circumstances. She'd watched her family company decay into corruption, had participated in that corruption through weakness and misplaced loyalty, now faced consequences that included professional exile and reputational damage. Not equivalent to Marcus's suffering, but real nonetheless. His response came without the anger that would have accompanied it weeks earlier. You made choices that led here, Catherine. Choices to hide your identity, to fail protecting my work, to prioritize Sterling over honesty. I don't celebrate your resignation, but I'm not mourning it either. You earned these consequences. Catherine's acceptance arrived immediate. I know, and I'm not asking for sympathy or forgiveness. I'm telling you because Evan's next move will be attacking you directly. He'll leak claims you were unstable, that our marriage ended because of your paranoia, that you fabricated evidence to destroy the company that rejected your employment application. Prepare for character assassination designed to undermine your credibility with the FAA. The warning carried strategic value despite its source, Marcus's military experience recognizing pre-battle intelligence when he heard it. Let him try. My technical analysis stands on engineering merit. Gabriel's testimony is corroborated by flight data. The expert verifications are independent and thorough. Sterling can attack my character all they want. It won't change the thermodynamics, proving their engine doesn't work. Catherine's exhale suggested relief or resignation. "I hope you're right. I hope evidence matters more than narrative, that technical truth outweighs corporate spin. But I've watched Evan manipulate regulatory processes before, seen him turn investigations into prolonged bureaucratic stalemates that protect Sterling through delay and confusion." Don't underestimate his ability to corrupt institutional oversight. The call ended with Catherine's voice carrying something that might have been genuine affection beneath the exhaustion. "Take care of yourself, Marcus, and tell Lily I'm proud of her, that she was smarter than both of us about seeing through my deception. She deserves better than having her trust betrayed by someone she welcomed into her family." Marcus sat with the phone in his hand long after the connection ended, processing the strange trajectory that had brought him from divorce humiliation to federal investigation to this moment of exhausted recognition that Catherine had been both perpetrator and victim of the same institutional corruption. She'd chosen poorly, prioritized wrong values, failed fundamental tests of integrity, but she'd also lived trapped in systems that demanded loyalty over ethics, that punished dissent and rewarded complicity. Understanding her situation didn't excuse her choices, but it complicated the narrative of pure villainy Marcus had constructed to protect himself from acknowledging he'd loved someone capable of such sustained deception. December progressed toward Christmas, with Marcus maintaining careful routine: work at Montgomery, evenings with Lily, weekend hours in his garage workshop developing new propulsion concepts that might someday compensate for the engine design Sterling had stolen. The FAA's official acknowledgement of his complaint arrived 3 weeks after filing, a formal letter confirming receipt and stating that investigators had been assigned to review the safety allegations. No timeline, no commitment to specific actions, just bureaucratic confirmation that his submission existed in their system. Sterling's counter-narrative intensified through industry publications and carefully placed media stories. Articles appeared questioning Marcus's credentials, suggesting his military maintenance background didn't qualify him to evaluate advanced engine design, implying personal animosity toward Catherine had motivated fabricated allegations. The attacks were sophisticated enough to plant doubt without making specific claims Miller could sue over, designed to erode Marcus's credibility through accumulation of insinuation rather than direct falsehood. Gabriel faced similar treatment, his test pilot expertise dismissed as insufficient for thermodynamic analysis, his testimony attributed to grudge over being fired from Sterling after the failed test flight. The coordinated nature of the attacks suggested Sterling had hired crisis management professionals, specialists in reputation warfare, who knew how to weaponize media coverage and industry gossip. Miller cautioned patience when Marcus called, furious about the latest attack piece. "They're trying to provoke you into responding emotionally, creating quotes they can use to paint you as unstable or vindictive." The FAA investigators aren't reading trade publication editorials. They're reviewing your technical analysis and expert verifications. Let Sterling waste money on PR campaigns that won't influence the people who actually matter. The advice was sound, but following it required discipline Marcus had to consciously maintain, each new attack triggering impulses to defend himself publicly. He'd spent his career in meritocratic environments where technical competence spoke louder than marketing, where evidence outweighed narrative. Sterling's strategy of reputation assault felt alien and dishonorable, the kind of combat that violated rules Marcus had internalized about fair competition and honest disagreement. Lily noticed his tension during dinner one evening, setting down her fork with the particular intensity that preceded serious conversation. "Dad, you're letting them get to you. The articles, the attacks, the questioning of your credentials. You know you're right about the engineering. You have evidence proving it, and the FAA is investigating. Sterling's noise is just noise. It can't change the thermodynamics." The observation was accurate and obvious, yet hearing it from his daughter provided perspective Marcus had lost in the daily grind of deflecting attacks. You're right. I'm letting Evan's tactics distract me from the fact that we've already won the important battle. The investigation is happening, the evidence is public record, and Sterling can't make physics work differently no matter how many PR consultants they hire. Lily's smile carried satisfaction and something else. The particular pride children showed when they successfully guided parents through emotional turbulence. Exactly. Now eat your pasta before it gets cold, and tell me about the new bypass duct concepts you've been sketching in the garage. I want to understand the variable geometry mechanism you're developing. The shift to technical discussion provided relief, Marcus explaining his latest engineering concepts, while Lily asked questions that revealed her growing sophistication in fluid dynamics and thermodynamics. The conversation reminded him why he'd become an engineer in the first place: the intellectual satisfaction of solving complex problems, the creative challenge of optimizing designs, the tangible reality of building things that worked. Sterling had stolen one engine design, but they couldn't steal his capability to generate new innovations, couldn't prevent him from continuing the work that defined his professional identity. Christmas arrived with manufactured cheer, Lily insisting on traditions despite the upheaval of recent months. They decorated the modest tree that had served them for a decade, hung stockings Sarah had embroidered before her illness, prepared the honey-glazed ham that had become their holiday meal after years of experimenting with recipes. Catherine's absence was notable, but not devastating. The empty space she'd occupied already filling with the routines that had sustained Marcus and Lily before her arrival. Lily's main gift was acceptance to MIT's early admission program, the thick envelope arriving December 23rd and transforming her carefully maintained composure into teenage excitement that made her seem younger than her 16 years. Marcus watched her read the acceptance letter 3 times, memorizing phrases and laughing at her own disbelief, and felt pride so intense it bordered on pain. Sarah should have been here to see this, to celebrate their daughter's achievement, to share the parental satisfaction of watching children surpass their origins. His gift to Lily was practical: a professional drafting set, an engineering reference library, tools she'd need for university coursework and the aerospace career she was building. Her gift to him was a framed photograph of the 3 of them, Marcus, Sarah, and infant Lily, taken 17 years ago when the future had seemed stable and full of promise. The image captured a moment before cancer and death and betrayal, when Marcus's biggest concerns had been maintaining aircraft and raising a healthy daughter. The simplicity of that earlier life felt impossibly distant, separated by years of struggle and loss that had transformed him from optimistic young father to wary middle-aged engineer. The photograph went on his workshop wall, joining technical diagrams and aircraft schematics, as a reminder that engineering served human purposes, that all the thermodynamic calculations and design optimization ultimately mattered because they enabled people to live and work and travel safely. Sterling's theft had felt personal because Marcus had invested himself in the work, but the real crime was endangering lives through defective design. The FAA investigation wasn't about vindicating Marcus Hayes. It was about preventing catastrophic failures that could kill hundreds of passengers. January brought the new year and mounting pressure as the investigation progressed invisibly behind bureaucratic walls. Marcus received requests for additional documentation, clarifying questions from FAA engineers, notification that investigators had conducted site visits to Sterling's facilities. Each interaction suggested the investigation was substantive rather than pro forma, that regulators were taking the safety allegations seriously enough to invest time and resources in thorough evaluation. Sterling's attacks intensified in proportion to the investigation's apparent seriousness, suggesting Evan recognized the threat to his company's survival. Industry sources reported Sterling had hired former FAA officials as consultants, experts who knew the regulatory process intimately and could advise on defensive strategies. The company's stock price had declined 20% since Marcus's complaint became public, investor confidence eroding as questions accumulated about the EcoJet's viability. Gabriel called in late January with news that shifted the investigation's trajectory. The FAA contacted me for follow-up testimony. They've reviewed my flight test data, and they want detailed technical debriefing about the engine behavior during the thermal event. Marcus, they're treating this as serious potential airworthiness issue, not just commercial dispute between competitors. The distinction was critical. Commercial disputes belonged in civil courts, where resources and legal talent determined outcomes. But airworthiness issues triggered the FAA's safety mandate and enforcement authority. If investigators concluded the EcoJet posed genuine risk to flight safety, they could ground the certification process regardless of Sterling's protests or political connections. Regulatory authority trumped corporate preference when passenger lives were at stake. Marcus felt strategy crystallizing around regulatory leverage rather than litigation combat. Did they indicate timeline for completing their investigation? Gabriel's response suggested he'd asked the same question. They're being careful not to commit to deadlines, but the lead investigator mentioned wanting to resolve this before Sterling starts production delivery. That gives them maybe 6 months before the company has binding contracts and customer aircraft that complicate any enforcement action. The timeline was aggressive by bureaucratic standards, suggesting the FAA recognized urgency in preventing defective engines from entering commercial service. Marcus's technical analysis and expert verifications had apparently convinced investigators that his allegations deserved thorough evaluation rather than cursory dismissal. Sterling's resources and political connections might slow the process, but they couldn't prevent competent engineers from recognizing fundamental design flaws when presented with comprehensive evidence. February arrived with Connecticut winter in full effect, ice storms and bitter cold that made aircraft maintenance particularly challenging. Marcus worked through frozen mornings and abbreviated daylight, the familiar discomfort of outdoor maintenance in harsh weather somehow grounding after months of regulatory uncertainty. Turbine blades still needed inspection, hydraulic systems still required servicing, aircraft still demanded meticulous care, regardless of investigations and corporate warfare. Rich Walsh appeared at his workstation during a particularly brutal afternoon, the older engineer's presence unusual enough to signal importance. Marcus, you've got visitors in the admin building. FAA investigators want to interview you on site, review Montgomery's facilities and your development work on the original engine design. The notification triggered adrenaline spike, Marcus's mind immediately racing through implications while his hands continued torquing fasteners with practiced precision. Did they say what specifically they wanted to examine? Rich's expression suggested concern beneath professional neutrality. Your workshop, your CAD workstation, any physical prototypes or test equipment you used developing the bypass duct design. They want to verify you had capability and resources to develop the technology independently, that Sterling's claims about you lacking proper facilities are false. The investigation had reached the verification phase, investigators moving beyond document review to physical confirmation that Marcus's development timeline was plausible. Smart methodology that would establish his credibility while potentially undermining Sterling's narrative about sophisticated corporate R&D versus lone engineer's impossible achievement. Marcus had spent 2 years developing the bypass duct design using equipment any competent engineer could access, nothing exotic or requiring Sterling's resources, just systematic analysis and careful optimization using standard aerospace engineering tools. He secured the engine panel he'd been working on, signed off the inspection checklist, stripped his coveralls, and cleaned up enough to meet federal investigators without looking like he'd spent the afternoon wrestling frozen machinery. The walk to the administrative building carried nervous energy, awareness that the next few hours could determine whether his evidence was credible enough to overcome Sterling's institutional advantages. The investigators waited in Montgomery's conference room. 2 FAA engineers whose credentials and demeanor suggested serious professional competence rather than bureaucratic box-checking. The lead investigator, a woman in her mid-40s named Patricia Chen, extended her hand with grip that conveyed aerospace engineers' practical strength. Mr. Hayes, thank you for meeting with us on short notice. We've reviewed your technical submission and the supporting documentation, and we have questions about your development process and capabilities. Marcus settled into his chair with the same focus he'd brought to military briefings, recognizing this interview would shape the investigation's trajectory. I'm happy to answer anything you need. My goal is helping you understand the technical issues with Sterling's design modifications, not winning commercial disputes. Chen's expression suggested appreciation for the distinction. Let's start with your background and qualifications. Walk me through your education, professional experience, and how you developed expertise in turbofan engine thermodynamics. The next 3 hours were the most intense professional interrogation Marcus had experienced since military promotion boards. Chen and her colleagues systematically examining every aspect of his credentials and development work. They questioned his Air Force maintenance experience, his transition to civilian engineering, his methodology for computational fluid dynamics analysis, his access to validation tools and expert consultation. Each answer led to follow-up questions that tested consistency and revealed depth of understanding. Marcus responded with engineering precision, explaining his systematic approach to bypass duct optimization, demonstrating his CAD capabilities on Montgomery's workstation, walking them through the thermal management calculations that had consumed months of iterative refinement. He showed them his workshop with its modest but functional equipment, the hand tools and measurement instruments any competent engineer would recognize as adequate for prototype development and concept validation. Chen's question sharpened when they reached Sterling's design modifications. Your analysis claims Sterling's 15% geometry changes eliminated critical cooling passages. Walk me through exactly how you identified those specific passages as critical, and how you validated their thermal performance. The question deserved comprehensive answer, demonstrating engineering rigor rather than speculation. Marcus pulled up his original CFD models, showing the airflow simulations that had revealed optimal cooling passage geometry, explaining the iterative process of testing configurations and measuring thermal distribution. I ran hundreds of variations, examining how different passage geometries affected turbine blade temperatures. These specific configurations, he highlighted the passages Sterling had eliminated, showed consistent thermal reduction across the operating envelope. When I saw Sterling's announcement specifying their geometry changes, I immediately recognized they'd removed the cooling mechanisms my analysis had proven essential. Chen's colleague, a younger engineer named Robert Kim, jumped in with a technical challenge. How can you be certain Sterling's modifications were the cause of Gabriel Wolf's thermal event? Couldn't there have been other factors? Manufacturing defects, instrumentation errors, pilot technique variations? The question was fair, and Marcus had anticipated it. Mr. Wolf's flight test data shows exhaust gas temperature rise that's consistent with reduced cooling airflow in the specific turbine stages where Sterling modified the bypass geometry. The thermal signature matches my predictions for what would happen if those cooling passages were blocked or eliminated. Manufacturing defects would show different patterns. Instrumentation errors wouldn't produce the sustained climb Wolf documented, and pilot technique can't explain temperature rise that exceeds material limits, regardless of power setting. The technical exchange continued for another hour, Chen and Kim probing every assumption and calculation, while Marcus defended his analysis with engineering evidence rather than rhetoric. By the end, he was exhausted but confident. They were evaluating his work seriously, applying appropriate skepticism while recognizing technical competence when presented with comprehensive documentation. Chen's closing statement confirmed Marcus's assessment. We'll be conducting similar interviews with Gabriel Wolf and the independent experts who verified your analysis. We'll also be examining Sterling's internal development records and testing protocols. This investigation will take several more months to complete thoroughly, but I want you to know we're treating your safety allegations with the seriousness they deserve. If Sterling's engine poses genuine airworthiness risk, we will take appropriate enforcement action regardless of commercial or political pressure.